Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe with Kay Cabot and Ashley Bastock as we are getting closer and closer to the NFL Combine next week in Indianapolis, kind of the unofficial start of the league's offseason. Let's just start there. We're going to go through some stories and some posts here on cleveland.com. Just kind of talk about some of the news, some of the things we're seeing, some things we've put up on the website. Mary Kay, I mentioned that the Combine is next week. It's sort of the unofficial start of the offseason. But when I look on the website on cleveland.com/Browns, where you can also become a Football Insider subscriber, by the way, there is a post from Mary Kay about the key dates. And one of the key dates actually was yesterday. And that is when teams can start designating franchise or transition players. We're coming up on the Combine. Things are going to start moving quickly, and everybody's kind of watching a Browns adjacent player, and that's Lamar Jackson, and what the Ravens might do there. That's kind of the first big domino here, right?
Yes. That is definitely something that they could do just to kind of hold the place and settle things down a little bit and get him franchised. And then, at that point, they could either trade him or, they could try to work through a long-term deal with him. He wants Deshaun Watson money. But I do think that, there's a little bit of tension between Lamar Jackson and the Ravens from everything that I understand. So all is not rosy over there. And there is a world in which the Cleveland Browns can be facing a new Ravens quarterback. And of course, that would be huge news. I mean, if they're going to break in someone new and young, that changes the whole climate in the AFC North. Or do they go out and they get themselves, someone like a Derek Carr or someone like that, or, maybe even an Aaron Rodgers, who knows what they would have up their sleeve. Obviously, they're going to want to contend. They've got a lot of really good football players on their team, and they're not going to just want to have, some kind of a rebuilding year or whatever. So, they will have to find themselves a quarterback. So all eyes are on the Ravens to see what they're going to do. They obviously have Todd Monken as their new offensive coordinator. That's interesting. Going to be really interesting to see how that goes. And, I saw he got asked a question today about Odell Beckham Jr. So who knows what's going to be happening over there in Baltimore. But certainly this is one of the very biggest names to watch as the franchise and transition period, the 2-week period, opened yesterday.
So, Ashley, when it comes to Lamar, it feels like more and more this Deshaun Watson contract is an outlier, a lot like the Mahomes contract, because we've seen, Kyler Murray got a higher total, but not anywhere close to the guarantee. Russell Wilson didn't beat it. If I'm Lamar Jackson, I might just say, you know what, go ahead and franchise me and let's see what Joe Burrow gets. Let's see what Justin Herbert gets. I think those guys might actually be the ones who kind of reset the market and are sort of the indicators of, is the Watson contract an outlier or is it a new trend? But I know Browns fans are hoping that that when they went out and signed Deshaun Watson, traded for and signed Deshaun Watson, that it just completely blew up everything with the Ravens.
And I think it might have, right? I don't know if they're going to be thinking about this in that much of forward terms. I think what's out there right now is the $230 million fully guaranteed. And again, if you're Lamar Jackson, I think maybe you're not looking at those guys, but you're looking at Deshaun, who I think is more comparable to you in terms of time in the league. And you're essentially saying, look at how much money this guy got when he's never been MVP. I have been. And I think you're looking at it too in terms of the off the field stuff. He got all this money despite all this controversy surrounding him. And if the team in our division is willing to pay that, why aren't you willing to pay me that? And seems like he's getting in his feelings on his Instagram stories from screenshots I've seen about you can't start a new chapter if you're still reading the last one. So I think there's definitely some drama brewing in Baltimore with this. And I do think you can't ignore the Deshaun Watson contract and all this. And I don't think he's going to. I think that's going to be very much a part of his rationale in believing how much he is worth.
Lamar loves him some social media. That whole drafts class,
oh, yeah.
they loved the social media.
It's a problem when quotes start appearing on IG stories. There's trouble brewing.
Yes, that is true. Okay, so Mary Kay, another key date in here that I think is really interesting is, of course, the big one that everybody's looking at, March 13th to March 15th. The legal tampering period starts on March 13th. The new league year begins on March 15th at 4 p.m. But what's interesting here in regards to the Browns is we saw last year, hey, the Browns need to sign a receiver. How much is it going to cost? Who are they going to get? And then a couple days before that tampering period started, news broke that the Browns were in agreement to acquire Amari Cooper. Do you think the approach will be similar this year? Do you think that Andrew Berry is going to be aggressive and try to get something done, or at least get the pieces in place to get something done before that new league year starts, and we might see the Browns acquired this defensive tackle or acquired this wide receiver or something like that, instead of sort of waiting to bring guys in and go through that free agency process?
Yes, I think so. The foundations are all being laid right now, and those things actually get rolling very, very quickly on March 13th. Even though that is the beginning of the legal tampering period, you actually have to start tampering before that so you can do something on March 13th. So, teams are discussing, teams are having their backdoor little conversations, their back channel talks with agents and whatnot. And in some cases, each other, and trying to figure out who's going where and how they're getting there and what they're going to do. And sometimes you see trades happen early and then they're not consummated until later. So that's another thing to watch out for. You're starting to see business heat up now. I mean, I've been saying this, we're hurtling towards the acquisition season. And I do think that the Browns will be aggressive because history has shown us that Andrew Berry is aggressive during these times. He will go out and get one or two of the best free agents. He will make trades. They went out last year. They got Deshaun Watson. I mean, they're not messing around here, right? They're not. I mean, they need to get to the Super Bowl. That's what this is all about. And they will, aggressively grab whatever they can, whenever they can, like they did with Amari last year.
And Ashley, when you look back at that Amari acquisition, it was such a big win for Andrew Berry on a number of levels. But most importantly, it was a big win because the wide receiver market just blew up within a matter of days. Christian Kirk got a huge deal, and then we saw Tyreek Hill get traded, and he got a huge deal. Guys were just getting paid like crazy at the wide receiver position. So Andrew was very wise to kind of get out ahead of that and get a guy with a little bit of team control already and do it for, I guess I don't want to call a fifth round pick nothing, but for what you got, it was essentially nothing.
Yeah, I think Andrew Berry is really good at that, it seems like to me, of predicting where things are going to go. Like you saw it with Amari Cooper. To some extent, you even saw it with them deciding to extend Denzel Ward when they did. Like Jair Alexander got extended right after Denzel, I believe, and he, beat Denzel's contract. Like I think Andrew Berry is very good at predicting those sort of things and making these kind of deals where they're, at a value to the Browns. And at the time, I remember last year, Mary Kay suggested maybe they'll go out and trade for Amari Cooper. And that wasn't really, I think, in the thought process of a lot of other analysts or fans, because everyone's just assuming you're going to take care of it in the draft. And then look what happened a week later. Obviously that first round pick is gone and you make the trade for Deshaun Watson. So I think he's very good at seeing not just one step ahead, but 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead sometimes with these deals, monetarily, and how the dominoes are going to fall with the rest of their roster shaping in an offseason.
Okay, so then this other key date on here that I want to touch on actually kind of transitions seamlessly into another headline that we have here, and that's May 1st, which is the deadline for teams to exercise fifth-year options for players selected in the first round. The Browns, after next year, when they have to make this decision, presumably on Greg Newsome, assuming he's still a member of the team, they won't have to worry about this for a little while after next season. But this time around, they have a decision to make, I guess, Mary Kay, on Jedrick Wills, but it does feel like it's a foregone conclusion. Do you see a world, though, where they're even waffling on it, or do you think they've maybe already decided, yeah, we're picking this guy's option up?
I think it's a foregone conclusion that they are going to pick his option up. You go out and you draft someone number 10 overall, you're pretty committed to that player. And, we've heard them already talk about how They were pleased with the progress that he made last year. They expect him to continue to get better under Bill Callahan. And, he has the lower round tender, the lower amount tender, because he hasn't made any Pro Bowls. These tenders, these fifth-year options go up based on your play time, then your Pro Bowls. And if you have multiple Pro Bowls, you're at the top tier. But he is at the second of the four tiers. And that is about $14.75 million. And it's not for next year, it's for 2024. So by the time you get to 2024, that is not going to look like an enormous amount of money for a really good left tackle. So I think they're going to pick it up. And then it gives them an opportunity to let him play out that season and see how it goes. Or they can start negotiating a long-term contract. So I don't really think it's anything to really get too concerned about. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, Ashley, what are you more surprised about? If that option gets picked up, or if it's May 2nd and we're like, oh, the Browns decided not to do this?
I would be more surprised if they decided not to do it for me. Like Mary Kay said, I think for the most part, they are not ready to give up on Jed Wills yet. Even if it hasn't been perfect, even if he hasn't made Pro Bowls, and even if there's been some question about how much effort he uses in any given play, when you see some of these, cuts of him going around on social media, he's kind of become, I think, an easy scapegoat in that regard, especially given who he plays alongside of on this offensive line. But I do think just given the fact that he was a first round pick, that right there gives him, to me, kind of a longer leash. And I think they're going to bank on the fact that they have one of the best position coaches in the game, like Mary Kay said, in Bill Callahan. And I think they're hoping that goes a long way and that it can help him take the next step. And I think it's just kind of a way of, standing pat right now and not obviously making a huge decision to extend him. But I would be shocked if they don't pick up that option.
Okay, so let's move on to another headline, and let's stay on Jed Wills a little bit here. I put up a story today, and it was actually part of our subscriber newsletter, ranking the Browns' 2020 draft picks. Looking back, and Andrew Berry made 7 draft picks in 2020. So I'm just going to give you guys the rankings, and you can tell me what you think. I had Donovan Peoples-Jones number 1. That felt like a no-brainer. I had Grant Delpit 2. Jedrick Wills 3, Harrison Bryant 4, Jordan Elliott 5, Jacob Phillips 6, and Nick Harris 7. So my top 4, again, DPJ, Grant Delpit, Jedrick Wills, Harrison Bryant. Mary Kay, did I get that about right? Is that how you would rank them, or would you make a change there with kind of how you'd rank the top of that draft?
Yeah, you know what? I would have to actually give this a little bit of thought, but I think you're right on the money with that. I think that's about right. I don't know for sure if the team would rank it like this, because I think that they're a little bit higher on Jed Wills than some of us are, because I think in part we look at the PFF rankings and we, base some of our evaluation on that. And I think we all expect those to be a little bit higher for him.
So let me interrupt you then. Do you think they would rank him above just Delpit, or do you think they would maybe even put him above DPJ? Because I had DPJ Delpit. I got to look here. I should know this off the top of my head. I had DPJ Delpit and Wills 1, 2, 3. Would they maybe put him 1?
They might put him 1. If not, then maybe 2 behind DPJ and ahead of Grant. But I don't know that there would be general consensus in the building on how to rank these guys. I think, if you talk to maybe more of a defensive minded coach, you might get a little bit of a different look. So I think beauty here is in the eye of the beholder. I think you got it right. But you could tweak it a little bit and still not be wrong. But I think for the most part, you got it right here.
Ashley, am I right? I just want you to say, yes, I'm right. That's all. And then
I think
play
you're
it on
right.
an endless loop.
This is how I would have ranked them. So, Dan, you were right. I think DPJ to me is the no-brainer because of where you got him and what you've been able to get out of him. I do like Grant above Jed. I mean, I think we've seen Grant kind of make a tangible jump. Now, I think those two guys could very easily be reversed depending on what happens this season. And then after them, it's almost, I'll use a political term here. After them, it's kind of a bunch of also-rans right now. And you can kind of, I think, make an argument for those guys either way. But I actually like how you have them sorted out here. And I would do the exact same thing.
Perfect. All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to look at some mock drafts that Ashley rounded up. And then I also want to ask about an assistant coach hire that the Browns made. And back on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast, Dan Labbe, Mary Kay Cabot, Ashley Bastock. All right, let's look at some mock drafts. So, Ashley, you put up a mock draft roundup.
Yes.
And there were a lot of defensive players there. Now, you also did a Browns-only mock draft, too, earlier this week. So, start us off. Who did you have the Browns taking?
So, I had the familiar answer that we can talk about in a minute with what is coming up across mock drafts, which is the Browns getting Mozzie Smith. However, what I had them doing is trading up with the Texans at I think like 33. I don't have my own mock in front of me. And I forget everything I gave them. I gave them two or three later round picks this year, and I threw in like the 5th round for 2023 because PFF's mock draft simulator was being very finicky in terms of what it would accept for a trade. I was like doing all these different things, and it was like 80% likely to be accepted, 87% likely to be accepted, 90% likely to be accepted, and the simulator kept throwing off my results. But the reason I traded up to get Smith is because I really don't think he's going to be sticking around in the 40s for them in the second round. I think he's an athletic freak, you know, the annual freaks list that always comes out. He was number 1 on that this year. He's big. He can, I think, rush the passer really well. I think as we get into the combine, he's going to rise. He got into a little bit of illegal trouble this year, but that's actually going to be wiped from his record, and it seems like it's over and done with. He avoided a felony weapons charge, which was what he was originally looking at. So I just think that guy, if they're going to want to get him, that they're going to have to trade up to get him. And I don't know that they would be willing to do that. It's what I would do because I think they desperately need defensive tackle. And I like Mary Kay's idea of kind of filling receiver in the free agent market. But as I looked at other mock drafts, Mozzie Smith was the popular name. I think people are maybe going to get away with that as he starts rising after the combine next week. But across the board, the multi-round mocks that I found, basically everyone has them taking somebody for the front of this defense, whether it's an edge rusher or an interior D lineman.
So, Mary Kay, with Andrew Berry, I think at times he's really predictable. And then at times it's like, oh, that came out of nowhere. Like Jed Wills, right? When they went left tackle at number 10, I think we all assumed when they decided not to listen to you and trade for Trent Williams, we all just knew, okay, they're going to go left tackle at 10. Greg Newsome became a pretty, I don't want to say obvious. It wasn't like a gimme, but he seemed like a guy they liked. You know, JOK was kind of getting linked to them too a little bit. And then last year, it was sort of like, oh, they could have had any number of receivers at 44. Instead, they traded down and took a cornerback as their first pick. At the same time, they did take a kicker early in the 4th round. So I can't figure Andrew Berry out. And it feels to me like when everyone's saying he's going to take a defensive lineman with his first pick, I almost feel like I should just go completely the opposite way and take like a left tackle or something. I don't know. Like it feels like Andrew likes to zag sometimes in these situations.
We probably shouldn't have been as surprised as we were that he took a cornerback where he did, because we hear them talk about cornerbacks all the time and how you can't have too many good cornerbacks. And so we probably should not have been that surprised. And we probably shouldn't have almost like ruled that position out just because he had Greg and Denzel, because in today's game, you need a lot of good cornerbacks, which is another reason why they have no plans. They are not freaked out. They're not doing, any damage control at all about what Greg said about not being open and playing inside. They're happy with their cornerbacks. But I don't know that he necessarily zags when you expect him to zig. I don't know if that's the case. But here's the thing about him is that I agree that he's not going to be completely 100% predictable because some of it's going to be determined by, of course, what happens in the trade market, what happens in the free agency market. So anything that anybody thinks about the draft right now is all going to change over the next 3-4 weeks when they make their acquisitions and they say their farewells. I mean, if they say goodbye to John Johnson 3, they could either be looking at another safety in free agency or having to go out and draft a safety with their top pick. I mean, so you just really don't know. And, if they don't do what we think they should be doing, then they have probably something else in mind. I mean, maybe they have a player that they planned on signing in the third wave of free agency that they're going to plug in at defensive tackle or a trade that they were going to make. So I do think that he's unpredictable, but, we can see the trends and we know, what they need. It's just a matter of how he's going to go about getting that particular position and when.
Ashley, I think that all speaks to something you were talking about earlier, like when they extended Denzel, talking about the 5th-year option, all of that. The one thing we can certainly say about this regime, not just the front office, but the coaching staff too, they aren't just winging it. There have certainly been front offices and coaching staffs where it at least feels like they're just kind of out here winging it. Mary Kay just sort of laid it all out. They're going to have a plan for what they want to do, even if something crazy happens and they do just take the best player available in the second round and it maybe isn't a great fit as we see it.
And I think what I've learned from even just covering one draft with this regime last year is it seems to me if there's a guy they really like, they're willing to take him. But if the guys they really like are all gone, then they'd be willing to do something like trade down at this point, given where they are and the assets they have. And I think that's why, point blank last year, they essentially said, some of these other guys we were looking at were gone. So we traded that pick down and, you essentially turn it into extra later round picks and that helps you get Cade York. So I do think so much of what they do for better and for worse, like we kind of talked about with Anthony Schwartz, right? Where it was a case of them maybe falling in love or becoming enamored with the wrong things. I think there are certain guys they become enamored with that if those guys are gone, they go to what's my plan B and how can I make the most out of that plan B? That's my biggest takeaway from going through one draft with these guys.
Okay, so here's the other headline I wanted to talk about, and that was a coaching hire that the Browns are going to make, and that is a new safeties coach. Ephraim Banda, who comes from the college ranks, has been a defensive coordinator at the college level, now moving up to the pro level to coach safeties. 41 years old. Mary Kay, this feels like such a Browns hire. 41 years old, a guy that walked onto his college, a college football program that was just starting when he was 25 years old, 26 years old, has just had a passion for getting into coaching and getting into football and saw that as his path. I don't know what Jim Schwartz necessarily looks for in assistant coaches. This felt like a very Cleveland Browns on brand hire though, for what this front office wants to do. Is you kind of did just preliminary research into him. Did you kind of get that feeling too?
Yeah, well, I've actually talked to him on the phone before, which I forgot about. Back when the Browns drafted Sheldrick Redwine, a safety out of Miami, Ephraim Banda had coached him at Miami, was his position coach there. So I've talked to him on the phone, and that particular story was about how Sean, he had looked up to Sean Taylor, the great, late safety out of Miami. And I talked to Sean's dad, Pete, and they took Sheldrick Redwine under their wing. And I'd have to go back and refresh my memory on the story, but I did end up talking to Ephraim for that story. And it's funny when you go back and look at some of those things, because I remember years before the Browns hired Todd Monken, I had interviewed him for a story, 7 years before that, about a receiver. So it's kind of weird to look back and be like, oh, I've talked to that guy. But even just in looking at pictures of him and reading a little bit about him, he just seems like one of those high energy, passionate guys. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think they needed a few more of those kind of really young, run through a wall or run down the sidelines, with your guys, kind of a guy. That's the kind of guy that this coach seems like to me. Very passionate, energetic. And I think it'll be good for Jim Schwartz to have some of those high energy guys on his staff because, he's sort of, on the opposite end of the spectrum a little bit. He's probably not going to be, running around like a crazy man over there on the sidelines. And sometimes you need somebody that can help get the guys fired up like that. So I think he brings some of that. But then the other point about him is the fact that this also means that they need a cornerbacks coach. So I don't know if they're going to promote from within or if they are, move somebody over or if they are going to, go out and bring in somebody else perhaps that Jim Schwartz has some kind of history with or something. But I mean, even when you look at what John Gannon did in Arizona, he hired a 29-year-old defensive coordinator who was his linebackers coach from the Eagles. So there are so many different ways to go about this. And I think it's good to have a mix of young, old, experienced, new, fresh, college. I mean, the college game is really seeping into the NFL. So it really cannot hurt to have some of those guys on your staff.
I would never want to be a college defensive coordinator. Just never. Like it would be miserable, especially the farther west you get. I would just never want to be a college. If I had to play Oregon, like every year, I would never want to be a defensive coordinator in college. But anyway, Ashley, I know this team takes a lot of pride in developing young coaches. They like bringing in younger guys like this. Mary Kay mentioned a 29-year-old linebackers coach. The coaching profession is getting younger and younger, but still, to bring in a guy from the college ranks at 41 who's really kind of climbed the ladder quickly, that this is just sort of, it feels like this is what this organization likes to do.
It does. And I mean, you've seen them do it, I think, countless times already, even though they've only been in place 3 years, that it seems like when they go after these assistants or hires or the younger people in the front offices, that it's with the intent of helping them build their careers. And, I think this year for, a large part, even though there were a handful of guys like you guys talked about with Chris Kiffin and Jeff Howard and Mary Kay saying, that they were free to look at other opportunities because the Browns wanted to go in a different direction. There's more guys that you've seen earn jobs because of how they've performed here. And I think this organization really prides itself on that from everything we've seen from them. So it's not surprising to me that they went out and got a guy like this, who I think is going to be hungry and, throughout his career has climbed the ranks, like you said. So I think he knows how to, work hard and to prove himself. They've seen him do that he has a track record of doing that. So I think maybe that's why they're comfortable giving him, a leg up here into the NFL from college.
Okay, there we go. A rundown of some stories that we've put up on cleveland.com/Browns over the last few days. It's going to just get busier and busier here as we move forward. As I mentioned, we're going to the Combine next week. We're going to hear from Kevin. We're going to hear from Andrew. I know Mary Kay is going to be working I guess not working the phones because you're going to see all these people in person, Mary Kay. I guess just working I don't know. She's going to be talking to a lot of people in Indianapolis. That's what I
tell the truth, Dan. You can say it. I'm going to be working the bars. That's what you do. You work the bars.
Yes. Okay. All right. I didn't want to say something that somebody was going to take out of context or something. So, but anyway, we'll have a lot of news coming out of Indianapolis, and then of course leading up to the start of the new league year, which just keeps getting closer and closer as we move along. So that'll do it for this edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. And because of all that, make sure you're a Football Insider subscriber, because a lot of it will get texted out. You'll want to be a part of that. Just cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page there. Mary Kay and Ashley, I will talk to both of you later.